All right, Raiders. Mr. Swanson here with an audio guide on the Crusades. This is called Flexibility and Making It Happen. You can see that I'm not in front of the screen today. Really got a screen videoed on a screen, but hey, they correspond with your slides, the PDF or the PowerPoint you can be looking at. So with no further ado, let's go. In this class, we'll be talking about the Crusades. A little funny here. Think about the Christian crusader knocking on your door. Think about the stereotype of a Christian missionary. Knock, knock, knock. Excuse me, sir. Do you have a moment to talk about our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ? Well, the Christian crusaders approach a little bit differently with their sword and shield, and we're going to see why this is a thematic of the Crusades. A couple moving pictures here. The Crusades have often been looked at in Hollywood, movies and TV shows, and just got a couple of moving images along the way. Assassin's Creed is another video game that kind of dives into the Crusades, and so some of you may played that game and maybe be familiar with some of the concepts of the Crusades. We're going to very simply go over the 5 W's of the Crusades. So let's get going. What is a crusade? Well, the word crusade is literally a holy war. It comes from the word croix, which is Latin for cross. So it literally means going to the cross. You can see the flag of the Christian crusaders there. So a crusade could, the word could be used in a lot of different ways. Even today, a lot of, say, Christian ministers or evangelists will have crusades. Think about the Billy Graham evangelical organization. They would call their large church gatherings. They go from city to city, a crusade. That is not the same connotation as a war in terms of fighting, not when Billy Graham's using the word, but in these contexts, it is a holy war. Those who went crusading did it from a religious perspective. So that's important to keep in mind. Crusade was considered to be holy. A couple of different shots, old pieces of art and whatnot here. All right, just moving right along in the 5 W's. Who? Well, the two sides in any competition, any game, any match, or any war. So in the Crusades here, we have the Christians. They're going to be known as the Crusaders. And then the Muslims, and they're going to be known as Saracens. So now maybe you can understand why we started this class with a two-class set. What is Christianity 101? What is Islam 101? Well, now we have the two sides pitted against each other in a holy war. So that is the why on that. Who? A couple of who's involved. So we got to understand the Pope, the Christian popes, Christian Catholic popes of the day. So Pope Urban II, he calls for the First Crusade in the year 1095. We'll go over those details in just a second. And another important who is Pope Innocent III. He calls for the Fourth Crusade. And at this point, you're probably counting on your fingers. My gosh, how many crusades were there? These two popes are notable for literally calling for crusaders to take up arms and go to fight on behalf of their Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. So that's why they get to stand out in the who category. Picture here of Pope Urban II calling for the First Crusade, 1095. So the way he did it is he actually, and just another piece of art here, Pope Urban II calling for the First Crusade. He stood on the steps of his church, the Sistine Chapel in Rome, and he kind of had a crowd gather around him, and he gives a public message, and he calls for his holy warriors to go and seize Jerusalem from the Muslims who were holding it. And, I can just imagine here today, if a politician gives a huge speech, he's probably got thousands of people in front of him physically and in person. And more than that, he's got cameras streaming the message all over the world. Not the case with Pope Urban here. Probably had just a couple dozen of people in front of him. But then his message got carried by messengers, would have been written down and carried from town to town, country to country, as fast as the horse could move. So not an instant mobilization of a Christian force, but, from when the Pope speaks, Christians listen, and this is a pretty good representation of what Pope Urban II would have looked like calling for that First Crusade. When? Well, we get a firm beginning point, 1095. And we can point to the day Pope Urban II called for the First Crusade. It's a little fuzzier as to say, when did the Crusades end? That's because we're going to have up to 8 Crusades total. And you might say, why is 8 in quoting marks? That's because the first 4 were the most important. So the first 4 Crusades were concrete. They began, they ended. But 5, 6, 7, and 8, they arguably are named Crusades. Historians can point out that there was a separate movement, a 5th Crusade, a 6th Crusade. But it just gets a little fuzzier. The armies aren't quite as organized. The mission is not quite as focused. The results aren't quite as measurable. So we're going to say, in this class, we're going to say that there were 4 important crusades, up to 8 total crusades. And that's why we can get a firm start date, but it gets a little fuzzier when you actually want to nail down a finishing date. You can see that this is 600 plus years of persistent fighting in Europe, in the Middle East. We're about to look at a map here as well. You can see this kind of transcends multiple centuries and multiple key units in world history. We're going to cross several other wars that are happening in Europe as well. So it's hard to place the Crusades in a world history class like this is exactly when the Crusades happened, because it transcends multiple eras. I mean, reasonably, it's going to take us into the time frame of the American Revolution. So in terms of our world history class, we're speaking of it right here, but I do want you to keep in mind there's a lot of era overlap with a lot of the things we talk about in class. All right, here's the cliff notes of the Crusades. So I'm going to dive into some of the military and religious details here. This is kind of the first starting slide, and then I'm going to go through all 4, and then I'll show you this slide again as the cliff notes. Cliff notes, of course, meaning the summary. So important condition to think about at the starting point. Before Pope Urban II called for the First Crusade, the Muslims held Jerusalem, the holy city of Jerusalem, present-day Israel, important to the life of Jesus. Jesus walked in and around Jerusalem. Jerusalem is where he hung on a cross. So Jerusalem is very important to Christians. Well, Muslims were in control of the city in the year 1095. And this prompts Pope Urban II to say, hey, young Christian men, rise up, take arms, and go take back your holy city from the Muslims who hold it presently. So we can kind of see the importance of the First Crusade. And here's some details on the First Crusade. So the First Crusade, 1095 to 1099, called for by Pope Urban II. Why? In order to expel Muslims out of the holy city of Jerusalem. And what are the results? Well, the results are that the Christian Crusaders succeeded in seizing, holding, and controlling Jerusalem. And if the Crusades stopped right here, we would say it was a clear Christian victory. But the Crusades don't stop right here. So put a pause at 1099. Let's move on to the Second Crusade. Second Crusade. So you can see the Christians hold the city for quite a while. But nearly 100 years later, 50 years later, sorry, I looked my math there. 50 years later, the Muslim invaders retake the city. So Second Crusade, 1147 to 1149, plus some battles fitting into the Second Crusade extend for decades longer. But the heart of the fighting was in those 2 years. Muslim invaders led by a popular Muslim leader named Yusuf Saladin. They defeated and captured several Christian-held cities and relics. A relic is something that's important to Christianity, a physical, tangible item. A lot of Catholic churches to this day hold relics. It could be down to even bones from important Christian leaders. Some churches are going to say they have the bones of St. Peter, or the bones of St. Paul, or the bones of Mary Magdalene, or Mary, the mother of Jesus. And I'm not here to get into all that right now, but that's what is a relic. What is a relic? Well, what happens here is that the Christian Crusaders were defeated, but allowed to leave Jerusalem alive. The Second Crusade includes the siege of Jerusalem of 1187, and an important piece of this whole Second Crusade as well. One of those relics captured is called the True Cross, and the True Cross was seen to be believed to be a piece of wood from the cross that Jesus hung on to die. Provable? Well, we'll never know for sure. But it was important to the Christians, and since it was important to the Christians, the Muslims said, ha, 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 we'll capture that. And they did. They captured this True Cross relic, and that was something that was very controversial going into the future, and something that the Christians definitely wanted to get back. If you believe this is a piece of wood from the cross of Jesus, you can understand why you would want to recapture it. So the Muslims have it. The Christians want it back at the end of the Second Crusade. This is Yusuf Saladin, a little bit of a character biography here. He was loved by Muslims and admired by Christians. Okay, they saw him as a worthy warrior, okay, a worthy adversary, and some of his behaviors in battle lended them to respect him versus hate him. So loved by Muslims, admired by Christians. He conquers Jerusalem via siege in the year 1187, but he allows for the surrender of the Crusaders in Jerusalem. Instead of killing every man, woman, and child inside the city, he had the city surrounded. He invaded the city. He was choking them out, food, water, and supplies. instead of killing every Christian on the inside, he allowed for their negotiated release. He allowed safe pass, so he let them leave the city. And then at the end of the battles, he actually, and going forward in the future, he allowed for the safe passage of Christian pilgrims into holy sites of Jerusalem. So at the end of the Second Crusade, this is important, Muslims hold the city of Jerusalem, but Christians are allowed to come into the city and visit their holy sites. Now, you can imagine, even though this was the policy, if Christians are, let's say that there's a road that takes them straight to a particular holy site, and Christians, you better stay right on that road. If you get off that road, we can't protect you. But there's still street bandits and those who would set up ambushes along these roads. And so even though there was quote unquote safe passage to some of these holy sites, it definitely wasn't necessarily the case 100% of the time. There were Christians still ambushed and harmed as they attempted to visit holy sites and holy cities in and around Jerusalem. And then of note, he did not return the true cross relic. He basically said, I don't know what you speak of. I don't have it. All right. It's been lost in battle. Sorry. So the Christians were trying to get the true cross back, something that really mattered to them. And he said, I don't have it. I don't know what you're talking about. And bottom line is it's been lost to history. Can't be tested. Historians and archaeologists today can't go back and, test the item and date it and find out if maybe it's a piece of wood from a cross used in execution. Maybe it belonged to the cross of Jesus. We'll never know. Bottom line is we'll never know because it doesn't even exist today. Another picture of Yusuf Saladin, and he is highlighted in two movies, one called Saladin, and it's a little bit older, comes from the 60s, and one a little bit more modern is called The Kingdom of Heaven, directed by Ridley Scott, also starring Orlando Bloom, and this is the Saladin character from the movie Kingdom of Heaven. Pretty good movie, very long movie. All right, the Third Crusade, so 1189 to 1192. This follows the siege of Jerusalem of 1187. Okay, so the Muslims are in control of Jerusalem. So Europe's response to the defeat of the Second Crusade involved rallying Christians from all over Europe yet again. But this time you get a large response, but a disorganized response. You got French Crusaders. They make a French army. You got German Christians Crusaders who make a German army, and then you got English Christians Crusaders who make an English army. So every nationality is led by a different leader. These leaders try to collaborate, long story short, but each of them has their own specific goals and wishes and egos, right? They all want to be the key leader. Well, so the collaboration is not fully successful. Ultimately, the English Crusaders are led by Sir Richard the Lionhearted, and the English Crusaders would have the most success in the Third Crusade of any of the other nationalities. They would negotiate this period of safe passage for Christians into the Muslim-controlled cities, but they did not retake Jerusalem. So this just this really fits into what I just said about Saladin. He allows the Christians to come into the city, and that a piece of that is basically the results of the Third Crusade. So Sir Richard the Lionhearted, if you watch, I'm a Disnerd over here. If you're familiar with Disney's Robin Hood, or really just the Robin Hood story in general, obviously Disney has made it cartoon with the foxes and the animals. But King Richard, this is Sir Richard the Lionhearted. So the king at the end of Robin Hood, who kind of deposes the weakling other king, the puny looking lion that has the snake as his battle buddy. Anyway, Sir Richard the Lionhearted was a true figure in English history. And we even see him in the story Robin Hood and the movies Robin Hood. He is King Richard. So Richard's efforts to regain possession of the true cross were unsuccessful, and that relic is lost to history. So I up front said it with Saladin, and then I fit it into here with the Third Crusade. The Third Crusade, the results of the Third Crusade are safe passage into holy sites, but not a retaking of Jerusalem. And the Fourth Crusade. So, still decades later. Let's see, remind myself of the years. About a decade later, the Fourth Crusade, 1202 to 1204. Christian Crusaders focus on not Jerusalem, but they focus on Muslim strongholds elsewhere in the region. So Muslim-held cities in Egypt and North Africa. They attempt to attack these in order to basically distract the Muslims into fighting elsewhere. Weaken their military, weaken their economy, make them spend money in places other than Jerusalem, make their leaders have to come and prioritize defending these cities in Egypt and North Africa. And the belief was if we can weaken their armies away from Jerusalem, they won't be centered on Jerusalem. If we can win in North Africa, we will eventually be able to re-win in Jerusalem. And that's not the case. So a good attempt, a decent military strategy, but that was not the case. And the Christians did not retake Jerusalem. So and beyond. So for 4 additional minor crusades happen over the next thousands of years or so, and 1,000 years of turmoil has led to a continually unstable Middle East. Like if you turn the news on today, the Middle East is synonymous with conflict, persistent fighting over the same holy sites between 3 members of major world religions. That's Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They all claim Jerusalem. They all claim holy sites inside of Jerusalem. Presently, Jerusalem resides in the recognized nation of Israel. Israel has been a recognized nation since 1948, and that itself creates controversy in the Middle East. There are Muslim nations that don't recognize the existence of Israel. The United States does. So you still have the Christian, Jewish, Islam conflict over the state, the actual nation of Israel today. So the old tensions of the Crusades may have been resolved inside of each crusade, first crusade, second crusade, third, fourth, etc. But realistically, they persist still to this day. So there you have it. The Cliff Notes again, pretty good one-slider there. All the talking I did kind of summarizes it. Boom, right there. Let me get you the where. Might have been helpful up front, but now I'll show you the where. The where is the Middle East and Jerusalem specifically. So as we pay attention to that, kind of follow the, you see the map there and you see where all the arrows lead. The take here is that the Muslims of the Middle East were already there. Okay, they were already near Jerusalem. The Europeans who wanted to come to Jerusalem had quite a journey, whether overland or oversea. The number of troops they needed had to make that journey. The amount of supplies they needed had to make that journey. So that was a disadvantage for the Europeans coming into Jerusalem, an advantage for the Muslims who are already in Jerusalem. And you can see going into North Africa, looking at yellow, that represents the Fourth Crusade. That's where battles happened in the Fourth Crusade. North Africa, Egypt, just like the ancient civilization we've spoken of already. This is the where and the why. So we're always trying to drive to the why. Crusades were an attempt to recapture the Holy Land from the Muslims. I mean, if you're coming from the Christian perspective, that's the answer, an attempt to recapture the Holy Land from the Muslims. When I say Holy Land, I mean the city of Jerusalem. But if you're going to come from the Muslim perspective, you got to flip the statement. The Crusades were a goal to maintain and hold the Holy Land, Jerusalem, away from the Christians. So really interesting which side you want to come from is how you have to phrase that. I am coming from the Christian Crusader perspective, the European perspective. So second bullet point there, Christian Crusaders were promised land. The Pope said, if you come and crusade for me, I will give you a plot of land to call your own. So very similar to some of the conversations we've already had and will continue to have. Feudalism, colonization. Why does someone travel? The age of discovery, to gain more land personally. Some may have come from that true, like, the Pope called me to do this. It's my duty to regain the holy sites from the Muslims. So I will put my life on the line in order to do that. And then the last bullet point there, the orange word is indulgences. The Pope promised forgiveness for those who go and crusade on behalf of their Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. So basically, a crusader could purchase the forgiveness for sins. Another fancy word for that is absolution. You will be absolved of all the sinning you have ever done if you go and fight on behalf of your Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And I'll let you decide what you think about that. I'm not sure what portion of the Bible the Pope was reading when he decided that this was the case, because that is not exactly how Christianity says it works. And that's a reason we had the class on Christianity 101, so you could kind of understand Christianity and Islam before we dove into this conversation about the Crusades. A little bit more of a why here, just adventure. Some Christian crusaders just wanted to leave Europe, wanted to leave the farm, wanted to leave feudalism. Let's go find an adventure. And again, we'll see that across time and history as well. The age of discovery, colonization. A lot of times people just get bored of where they are. They want to go see something new. So the sense of adventure is always going to be one of the whys whenever people travel. Here's specifically what the Crusades were not. The Crusades were not an evangelistic mission. Okay, it was not a call to convert Muslims to Christianity. So these Christian crusaders didn't put their armor on and take their swords over to Jerusalem to try to preach to the Muslims. Okay, that was not a part of the conversation. That was not a part of the goal. The goal was to overthrow the Muslim invaders or those who were holding Jerusalem. And of course, the Christians thought that was not the right thing for them to do. So it was not evangelistic. It was not. That's why, knock, knock, excuse me, sir. Do you have a minute to talk about our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ? That's why that opening meme is funny. The more you understand history, the more you can find some of these memes funny. It was not a call to evangelism or a call to convert the Muslims. Quite the opposite. So who won? Like, let's just drive to the finish line here. The Christians, the Muslims? Well, the answer is, what side do you come from? Generally speaking, the Christian mission failed because they did not recapture Jerusalem and hold the Holy Lands. First Crusade, if it stopped there, the Christians win, okay, quoting marks, win, because they were holding Jerusalem. But they lost it in the second. They didn't regain it in the third. They didn't regain it in the fourth or beyond. Eventually, Jerusalem today is held by Jews and the state of Israel. So from the Christian perspective, the Crusades were a failure. From the Muslim perspective, right, and this is an important piece of world history, we're going to look at perspectives different than our own. If you're a Muslim in Jerusalem, you say, we won. We lost the first crusade, but boy, we got Jerusalem back in the second. We held it in the third. We held it in the fourth, and on. So interesting perspective. But from the Christian European perspective, the Crusades were a failure because they did not hold the Holy Lands. And that is also the results. Sad crusader heading home in defeat. You can see a lot of the symbology on these pictures here. The red cross on the armor, on the armaments, that represented a holy warrior, one who was going to the cross. Remember, that's what the crusade literally means. But here's the big but. The Crusades were a failure to recapture the Holy Lands, but it did result in an increased cultural exchange between Europe and the Middle Eastern cultures. And we're going to call this a positive. Now, it wasn't on purpose. It wasn't like, let's go exchange culture with the Muslims in Jerusalem. But it was a result nonetheless. So new ideas. Like anytime you travel, you're going to gain new ideas. I traveled to Nepal over the summer, and I saw how they do life over there. And even though they're missing what I would think is some basic technologies, I mean, let's just start with air conditioning. That doesn't mean that they're a backwards country. I learned so much by seeing another culture. So I give that as an example. The same thing here in the crusading time period, new ideas on education, science, trade, technology. Actually, the Europeans thought that they were the it society. And what they really found out is that the Middle Easterners, they got it going on as well. In fact, they're more advanced than us mathematically. They're more advanced than us scientifically and with certain technologies. So the Europeans went to the Middle East. They saw life being done in a different perspective, and they brought a lot of that back to Europe with them. New understanding on education, science, trade, and technology. So a net positive when you consider the cultural exchange. Positive takeaway, the Crusades helped Europe change and grow because the Europeans now had firsthand knowledge on just how backwards Europe was in compared to the more advanced Islamic culture. And again, I don't think they would have outrightly admitted that, wow, those Muslims are way more advanced than we are, but that was a net result. They brought back technology, education, science, math, trade, etc. So there is a positive takeaway. More results, overall results, there's a decline in feudalism in Europe because this took people off the farms. It showed them that they could travel the world, that there's more than just farming in Europe. And it also damaged relations between Muslims and Christians for a long time to come. Like, arguably, you could bring this into September 11th, 2001, the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan. I'm not saying I was a part of the Crusades, but the damaged relationship between the Christian West and Islam in the Middle East does have its roots in the Crusades. And of course, this is a negative result, the damaged relations. So there's a review right there. If you can answer the 5 W's, you understand the Crusades. What is a crusade? What does the word crusade mean? Who participated in the Crusades? Who is a Saracen? Who called for the Crusades from the Christian side? How many total crusades were there? How many significant crusades were there? When did the crusades occur? Where did the crusades occur? And why would an individual choose to crusade? If you can answer those questions, you got the crash course of this class, and you're tracking finally what is the lasting impact of the crusades, etc. So there you have it. There you have it. I'm clicking through these here. A little bit of Crusaders today. You know, I always like to bring it into the present day. I mentioned that Crusaders are in Assassin's Creed, the video game. So if you play that game, you're kind of living the Crusades a little bit. And I'm not a video gamer, but I do like these historical games that kind of give you all a reason to pay attention to history class. Crusader is used as Batman is often called the Caped Crusader. So I think that the writers of Batman say he's a man in a mask who's trying to do good in Gotham City. He's the Caped Crusader. He's in a holy war to overthrow the criminals of Gotham City, the Caped Crusader. So there's that word in use today. And finally, a lot of Christian colleges, maybe high schools, private high schools or colleges, for a long time carried the name Crusader. And you see a couple of examples here of colleges with their mascots. His basketball jersey there says Crusaders. But in recent years, that kind of came under attack, cancel culture and whatnot. I'll let you decide what you think about that. I'm just giving you the facts. Kind of came under attack because the Christian Crusaders killed people. And the question was, were they justified in doing so? Were they a true representation of Christianity, etc.? So a lot of Christian schools, once named the Crusaders, started to change their mascot name, and that's just a fact. So you can decide whether you agree with that or not. Here's an article here, a headline that Valparaiso College will drop the name Crusaders because that name, the term Crusaders, has been embraced by hate groups and used in negative ways. So it's the world around you today. You got to pay attention to it. Final interesting point here. What are three things that Judaism, Islam, and Christianity all have in common? So having come through several classes at this point, I hope this is a key takeaway for you. The Torah, which is a sacred text. It's the Christian Old Testament. All right. It's the entire Hebrew Bible, the Torah. It's the Christian Old Testament. And then there's also, it's also important to Islam. So they share that sacred text, the Torah. Abraham, the prophet, he's in the Jewish Old Testament or Jewish Bible. Okay, he's a key Jewish prophet. He's in the Christian Old Testament, and he's also a piece of the Quran and the story of Islam. Okay, he's a prophet in Islam. And finally, the holy city. Okay, it's holy to Jews, it's holy to Christians, it's holy to Muslims as well. So interesting takeaway there on what all three of these major world religions have in common. And finally, just some key vocab here. Basically, it's what your notes called for. So if you're reviewing or trying to answer the 5 W's, I'm giving you some answers right here, something you should pay attention to. And that said, Mr. Swanson from room 1206 for the Crusades crash course. Hope you got it all. Email me if you have any questions. Love you, mean it, out.